Jan Hutchins here again with the Men's School coaches, and we're going to talk actually about blessings and the way in which we might, before we're through, talk about the way we are trying to bless the world now as a world that seems to be in such trouble, how you're living into this. Dave, this is the topic you wanted to do, so get us started.
Well, in our work, and especially in the Mankind Project, I remember the first time I heard about blessing, and I had a reaction to that, and because I come from a very secular background, and probably even kind of my postmodern allergy to religion and things of that sort. So it immediately sounded to me like some kind of a religious theistic thing. And then as it was explained to me, no, it's really a way of seeing. Really a way of seeing the wholeness, the completion, the best potential in a person, and really naming it. And so for example, I say, Jan, I bless you because you are such a beautiful, radiant man, and you've been this gift of light in my life. You always are there. You show up with wisdom and calm and this vulnerability. You let me see who you are, and in that I feel so safe and comfortable. So bless you. And so in that exchange, we both get something out of this, out of the blessing.
Yeah, amen. And it is something I loved. Robert Bly's line. He said, "Anybody who is a seasoned man, an elder, who isn't going around finding young men to bless, is not doing his job."
And I would add to that, it's kind of a pet peeve of mine. I like when people know who I am before they bless me. I'm not big on the whole blanket blessing. For me, it's an acknowledgement of having been seen and valued. And for me, that means the person has to have some data on me or some knowledge of me in order for it to really hit bone. Otherwise, it just feels perfunctory to me. So I think that personal nature of receiving a blessing is incredibly important. Probably as important as being able to receive a compliment or a blessing without brushing it off. I think that's another stage of development. How many times I said, "No, I didn't do anything. It's no big deal," and just brushed off the blessing. And by doing that, diminished the offering of the individual and myself.
I want to dovetail on what you said, Jan, and quoting Robert Bly. I believe he also said that when it comes to younger men, if we're going to talk developmentally, that in relationship to older men, older men really only have two ways of being in relationship. That's either in a way where younger men are going to feel seen, acknowledged, honored, and blessed, or not. But anything less than blessing isn't necessarily cursing, but it's not very honoring. And I don't know how many older men are really conscious of that in relationship to this dynamic that I believe every one of us had at some point growing up. That was that hunger and that longing to be seen and recognized and acknowledged, and at least what we're trying to do affirmed in some way, as a compass to know that I'm going in the right direction. I think we all have that longing in some way. I think the more seasoned we get, the more attuned we get, like Snake was pointing to, I'd like something that has some juice to it when somebody's blessing me that I don't recognize or see or already know about myself. That's the really delicious stuff that'll last me for a long time when it's really personal. Yeah, and it's sovereign. I mean, for me, I think of sovereign energy. That's what the sovereign does. He blesses and honors and uplifts and unites people, not divides and conquers.
Way to go. It seems like it's part of the work that we are asked to come into situations where we whether we're paired up as buddies on the weekend or have a mentorship relationship with one of the other staff members about a process, or are involved in the leadership track or as a ritual elder, where you're going to have a discussion at the end of the weekend with the leaders around how well you've done. And so this offering one another this perspective is a beautifully rational and objective way to give blessing. And yet it has the same effect that I see you and I see your change and improvement. And by definition, that turns out to be a blessing if I've put myself in that crucible.
Yeah, I mean, blessing isn't always about getting all the nice, sweet stuff and the juicy stuff. Sometimes it's a man telling me his truth about something that I don't recognize that's in shadow about myself, which can be really liberating and freeing, you know, when we have the maturity and the context and the container to hold it and take that stuff on, you know, in a mature, masculine type of way that is not about being offended or reactive or shutting down, but taking it on because somebody cared enough to give it to us to help support us on our path. I mean, that's a blessing too. You know, some of the hardest blows I've gotten from men that I trusted and respected and admired, you know, not cutting me short is a real gift.
I would agree. Go ahead, Danny.
Okay, thanks, Snake. I wonder if there is a relationship between projection and blessing. You know, we did our earlier talk today about projection. I wonder if it takes a certain amount of time and suffering in recognizing just how much we project and acknowledging how much we are projected upon before we come to an awareness of the uniqueness of who we are and the commonality of who we are and the suffering that every human being has to endure in this evolutionary conscious process, that we have to go through a certain amount of suffering before we have the capacity to see another, to truly see another, and to be able to find somebody's gold, even in the midst. You know, it's always interesting to try to bless a man who's a container buster, who is a pain in the ass, who, you know, fucks shit up left and right, to be able to see the gold in that man, to kind of see through all the crap that not only is his, but is ours. And to find that heart-opening place to see a man and his beautifulness and to bless him. Maybe that's, you know, maybe the capacity to bless does come with age. It does come with suffering. It does come with doing a significant amount of inner work before we have the capacity to see with our hearts.
I would agree. You know, one of the things that came up for me, one of my teachers was fond of saying, there's only two types of self-talk, blessing or curse. Mm-hmm. Now, I know that one real well, and as I've matured, I've throttled back on the personal curses and throttled up the blessing with regard to my self-talk.
Yes.
And I think that does come with maturity and not denying it. There's times I can be a real ass, and I'll look at that just as unflinchingly. But my willingness to push feelings about myself that are positive away has diminished as I've aged.
I do think, and I do think there's an aspect too, you mentioned earlier, Snake, of the receiving blessing, where I heard Martin Lassoff talk about it as kind of the blessing channel, that if I as a man have trouble taking in blessing, that one way to work with that is to really practice giving blessing. And that the more that I give blessing and practice that way of really seeing and honoring allows me to take it in too. And kind of exercise that muscle, if you will, as a training.
You think of the ultimate blessing too. I think of the story so many of us have heard about. I've heard it spoken about Australian or African culture. God knows where it came from, where if someone does something to offend the culture, they put him in the center of the circle and remind him how good he is. To a certain degree, a lot of what we're talking about falls into that. And culturally, we don't have a setup for doing that, reminding people that they're actually good. Yet we do need that reminder every so often, and it is part of maturing, I believe.
You know, to dovetail on that, in certain tribes in Africa, when a baby is born or when the mother is carrying the baby just prior to birth, she goes out into the wilderness and she finds the song that belongs to that baby.
Mm.
And she sings that song to that baby through the course of his early life. And should that baby get to be older at some point in time and lose his way, that when they bring him into the center of the village and the community and they sing his song back to him because he's forgotten who he is. What an incredible idea and practice. If we could do that, each of us have a song, and when we forget, we have people that love us that can sing us that song and remind us who we truly are. What a blessing that would be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow.
That's so beautiful. And it makes me think that that is the courageous reason the Nazi over there is exactly the person I have to figure out how to figure out his song. I got to get to that person's song before I can tell them anything. They have to know I know them and somehow trust me before they'll even hear me say anything. And that's our problem. Nobody's willing to do the hard part of suffering, the push down, push away. So, not nobody, but
you know, I have a personal thing here as my emotion begins to rise around my younger son who's clearly lost his way. As hard as I've tried to sing him his song, somehow he has not been able to hear it from me. Because I'm the bearer of both the gift that I bring him and the wound that I bring him. And I wish that he could come into a circle that knows him well enough to sing his song so he can hear himself, because I can't. And I'm really sad and heartbroken that I can't sing my son's own song to him.
a sign of this circle that we all wait and don't try to save and just be with Danae.
Thank you. I sing a prayer to him and to Spirit every day that he's safe, that he's continuously open to being illuminated and to find himself. I can't say it to him directly, but I can keep putting it out there into Spirit, and hopefully it'll find its way into his heart and soul someday. Thank you for holding this for me, guys. Thank you.
In keeping with that, if we finish, what is the way you men go about trying to bless the world around you these days? What is the thing that you think is lacking that you try to add into environments wherever you go? I'll say mine at first, just to get it out of the way. Don't ask a hard question and then not face yourself. For me, it is I try to slow everything down. Wherever I go, I try to pause, like we did at the end of hearing Danae's comment or otherwise, and really give time for something other than my reaction to occur. So I try and slow things down because I think our world is stressed, and when our brains are stressed, they don't work. So I'm in with that.
Yeah, for me, it's acceptance. As I've grown and matured, my ability to accept ways of being in the world very different than mine has increased. And I think that's the basis for starting an acknowledgement or a blessing, is that there is acceptance in the room.
I'll speak to that acceptance piece too. I'm thinking about a Buddhist story about the skillfulness of needing to know where the arrow came from and what kind of poison's on it and who shot it before I remove it from myself. And before I can take any skillful action, the need to accept that that's happened. I don't have to like it. I don't have to agree with it. My opinion doesn't matter. But if I can embrace it and in some way honor and acknowledge, which is a form of blessing of what is, then I can take skillful action. And it's my attachment and resistance to accepting things as exactly as they are that hamstrings me more than anything else. So I'm with Snake on that one. It's an acceptance of what is in order to be able to move more skillfully to what's next and what I can do.
I'll dovetail on both of you. The Buddhists say suffering is the unwillingness to accept what is. And when I'm suffering, whether it's self-imposed or externally imposed, there's something about the reality that's presenting itself to me that I have not accepted. I seem to be more accepting of the flaws of others than I am the flaw of myself. I'm my own worst critic. And I've learned that there's a gift to that. I've been rigorous in holding my own foot to the flame to learn the lessons that have been painful and difficult for me. But as I age, I find that I'm much more, and maybe this is the tequila, quite honestly, that I'm much more accepting of my own flaws. It's like, okay, I'm doing that again. Oops. I say I'm sorry where appropriate. I forgive myself where appropriate. And, I say, okay, I'm a flawed man. I'm going to die unfinished. And I need to be able to live in my own skin in a good way. Seems to get easier.
Yeah, well, as the resident Buddhist priest of the men's school, I'm delighted by this thread, and and all these things are part of the blessing I want to bring, and at the base of it is just the realization of not knowing, that really fundamentally who I am, what this experience is not knowing, and with that comes this wonder and amazement of and a gentleness with the world. I mean, how invested can I be in my projection or invested in my righteousness when at the bottom line, I know I'm full of shit and I really don't know what's happening, And so for me, that acceptance and not knowing and the gentleness that brings to me and to others, that's the blessing I aspire to bring.
Oof. Dave, that's so beautiful. And I want to use a counter to finish. By the same token, there is this beautiful knowingness that occurs at various points of life where my broadcast career and everything that I did led up to this moment, this group, this place in my life. And like it or not, and I really like it that I'm here now, it is connected somehow, or at least it feels, as Jobs said, at the end, it sure does look like there was a path that was destined all along. Thank you. The faculty of the men's school, we bad.
Amen. Fucking A.
And as soon as I get to my computer, we're out.